They experienced the highest of highs and a great season in 2021, but the lowest of lows kind of came crashing down in 2022 and the offseason that followed. The Michigan State Spartans are one of the more interesting teams as we head towards 2023. Can Mel Tucker build this team back into a successful Big Ten football program?
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
Boy, interesting is putting it lightly when you talk about Michigan State right now, because they are on such a roller coaster. They shot up way high, 11 wins in 2021, and then they failed to make a bowl game in 2022. Where is the direction of Michigan State football? That's the big question I have as I look at the Spartans for 2023, because the direction of this program going forward the next 3, 5, however many years, it might be dependent on where this team lands in 2023. We know Mel Tucker in Michigan State has really put a lot of emphasis into the transfer portal, right? Getting that transfer talent. We know all about Kenneth Walker and what he was able to do back in 2021. This season, the fifth most transfer losses in the Big Ten. They lost 20 players to the transfer portal. Constant ebbs and flows. I mentioned ebbs and flows, the ups and downs. Of course, they experienced the ups in 2021 with that great season. That's the only team over the past 2 years that has been able to beat the Michigan Wolverines. And then they came back down. When they lost Big Ten games last season, sometimes they weren't exactly the closest games in the world. And then that kind of poured over into the offseason as well, with the losses of Payton Thorne and Keon Coleman in the transfer portal. Like a lot of people at that time, when Thorne and Coleman declared their intention to enter the transfer portal, a lot of people thought the sky is falling. What the heck is happening in East Lansing, Michigan? But Mel Tucker has the opportunity to kind of flip the script, maybe flip the narrative a little bit here in 2023. Here's the thing about Michigan State. They have back-to-back top 25 and top in the nation, top 5 in the Big Ten recruiting classes. Mel Tucker's building a solid foundation. And this might be the year where some of those recruits, some of those 4-star kids that have donned the green and white, that this is maybe the year that they have to step up, and where Mel Tucker maybe needs to rely a little bit less on transfers being some of his impact players. Now, there are going to be some this year, and we're going to cover some of those players, but let's see some of those recruits that he's been able to bring in really step up and really play a big role on this football team. Now, going forward on offense, you saw it on the graphic. Payton Thorne and Keon Coleman both transferred out of the program late in the spring transfer period, both transferred down to the South. Keon Coleman to Florida State, of course, Payton Thorne to offense. So how do you replace that? A late transfer. That really hurts because you don't have spring ball to kind of integrate kind of your new pieces, so to speak. How do you replace a guy in Payton Thorne, starting quarterback, the last 2 seasons? Of course, the success that he had in 2021 combined for nearly 6,000 yards the last 2 years, 46 touchdowns to 21 interceptions. His numbers, his ability doesn't exactly pop off the page, maybe as one of the Big Ten's best quarterbacks, but that experience, that leadership, of course, is a factor, and losing that is kind of a big deal. I think the bigger loss is Keon Coleman transferring to Florida State. Last year, 58 catches, 798 yards, and 7 touchdowns. He was the big playmaker. Maybe other than Jaden Reed, in terms of players that would have been returning this year, he would have been the big playmaker. Now they're searching for a playmaker on this offense, and I mentioned Jaden Reed, who they also lost to the NFL this year. Here's another loss that not a ton of people are talking about. Jeremy Bernard, he transferred to Washington. He was the top player in Michigan State's 2022 recruiting class, 4-star, top 200 guy, wide receiver. He only had 7 catches, under 28 yards last season, but he was kind of that guy that was maybe alongside Keon Coleman, was expected to really step up and play a big-time role, but he transferred out to Washington. Watch him have a tremendous year in that offense with Michael Penix over there. They're expected to light up. They're also going to play each other. We'll talk about that in the schedule portion of this. At tight end, you lose Daniel Barker, a good red zone threat, big red zone threat. So how do you replace it? First, you got to take a look at the quarterback. It looks like it's going to be Noah Kim, but four-star Katin Houser, who a lot of people think are the future at the quarterback position for Michigan State. A lot of people think he's still in the race as well, but it looks like Noah Kim. A lot of publications, some people out there throwing some heat behind Noah Kim, that he's maybe a player to watch out for in the Big Ten. He looked pretty well in their spring practice. Their televised spring practice wasn't exactly a spring game. It was more drills really than anything, but no matter who you throw out there, there's going to be maybe a little bit of growing pains. There's going to be, it's going to be a slower process to maybe develop into things. Now, Payton Thorne wasn't the greatest quarterback in the world, but still replacing him and replacing maybe that stability that you knew at the quarterback position, that's something to say as well there for Noah Kim or Katin Houser. Will Michigan State take a step down? It remains to be seen. But either way, replacing a quarterback that put up those kinds of numbers the last two seasons, even though they weren't super outstanding still, it's something that is to be kept an eye on in terms of where does the quarterback position go. I think Noah Kim could be solid. Is he a top 8 to top 10 quarterback in the Big Ten? I don't know. I think that might be pushing it just a little bit. They got to rely on this offense to make life easier for the quarterback. They're going to have to rely on the run game. Jalen Berger, he played better, had a little bit more production towards the end of the season last year. Overall, 683 yards rushing, 6 touchdowns. He had 4 rushing touchdowns in the first 2 games last season, just 2 rushing touchdowns in the last 10 games. You got to improve on that. Now, last year they brought in Jalen Berger from Wisconsin, and they brought in Jarek Broussard from Colorado, right? The 1-2 punch didn't even come close to matching what Kenneth Walker did on his own. They want another 1-2 punch. They brought in UConn transfer running back Nathan Carter. He suffered a season-ending shoulder injury 4 games into the season last year, but he had 384 yards and a touchdown in those 3 full games that he did play. You go back to 2021, led the team in rushing, 578 yards and 2 touchdowns. Adds a little bit more speed, I think, to maybe the thunder that is Jalen Berger's power running ability. So this is a good combination, it looks like, at the running back position. Now, once again, you got to have a balanced offense across the board. Got to have a little bit of a passing game, some threats down the field to help these quarterbacks out and not have 9-10 guys in the box to really stifle up this running game that I just talked about. Trey Mosley is expected to be the main target. He was 3rd on the team in receiving last season, 359 yards and 4 touchdowns. You go back to 2021, he had 530 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, does he pop off like a Jaden Reed or a Keon Coleman? I don't think so. Can he work his way into a number 1 role with more repetitions and more trust from this coaching staff? Possibly. I think he's got some good qualities out there at wide receiver. Tight end, you bring back Malik Carr. He had similar stats to the starting tight end Daniel Barker last season. 16 catches, 209 yards, and 2 scores. At 6'5", 255 pounds, he provides a big frame, which is key when you get down inside the 20, when you get down in the red zone in the scoring area. Now, other people on the perimeter you expect to step up this season, Christian Fitzpatrick and Matori Foster are 2 guys. They combined for 9 catches, 115 yards last season. Not exactly lighting the world on fire. There's a drop-off after Trey Mosley. I don't think there's any question about that. Foster started 3 games in 2021, 12 catches, 164 yards, and a touchdown back a couple of years back in that great season for Michigan State. But these are guys that are going to have to step up big time. If you're relying on Trey Mosley to really produce that much of the load, I think you could. I'm not saying you will. You could be in a little bit of trouble on the offensive side of the football. Keep an eye on a familiar name if you're a football fan over the last 20 years or so. Antonio Gates Jr., 4-star kid, top 300 guy. A lot of hype behind him because of his name, obviously. But he was one of the best players in the state of Michigan when he came out of high school. We talked about it at the top of the preview. You need to see some of the development from some of these 4-star players that you're recruiting. Antonio Gates Jr., just another example of that. Went to the portal to add some wide receiver depth with Alante Brown from Nebraska, started a good amount of games for the Huskers last season, 16 catches, 191 yards. Don't expect him to maybe be a top threat in this offense. I expect him to maybe be more of a depth guy. Beyond Trey Mosley, I think there's a lot of guys that fit in. Who's going to be the number 2? Who's going to be the number 3? I think there's a group of 4 or 5 guys that could really fit into that number 2 role, to that number 3 role in this receiving core. So the battles are going to be very interesting to see who really steps up in those types of roles. Alante Brown is definitely going to be in the mix, though, I think. They have a good core on their offensive line coming back. You got a couple of all Big Ten type of guys. Let's go through it. Center Nick Samick started all 12 games last season. Honorable mention all Big Ten. At guard, J.D. Duplain started every game, and not only 2022, but the year before in 2021. Honorable mention all Big Ten last season. 30 consecutive starts, which with what you go through in the trenches on the offensive line, that's something to be commended, no question about that. Spencer Brown at tackle at the right side, started all 12 games. So a lot of starts, a lot of Big Ten starts, a lot of familiarity up front on that offensive line is very big, especially on an offense. I view this offense, if they are going to have success, this is probably going to be an offense that's going to run the football better this season. Jalen Berger seems to be a key for this Michigan State offense to have success, and then throwing the ball off of that, whether it's Noah Kim or Caden Hauser at quarterback, throwing the ball off of that to some of your wide receivers on this team, and a tight end Malik Carr and others, I think will be key. This has got to be a more physical offense, I believe, in 2023 to be able to have success. Not only success in the run game, but success as an offense, success in the pass game, play action, working off of that as well. So you look at the offense. They lost a lot of pieces. There's a lot of uncertainty on the offense. There's potential, but we just don't know what's going to happen. When you lose that much of the production of your offense, there's a lot of question marks at East Lansing on the offensive side of the ball. But when you look over to the defensive side of the ball, I think things look a little bit better. Maybe not just a little bit better. I think things look a lot better for Michigan State. Now, this has been a Michigan State defense that statistically has been one of the worst in the Big Ten, which is crazy because Mel Tucker is this defensive guy. Okay, this should be a solid defense this season. It's most likely, not that this is setting a high bar, but it's most likely maybe the highest ranked best defense of the Mel Tucker era. Coming into this was a defense that was 13th in the Big Ten in total defense last year, 13th in passing defense last year as well. So they got to improve big time. I think they will improve on these numbers. Now, their front seven looks very good. It looks very good, and it starts with the linebackers. They have a really good linebacker tandem. A couple of days ago, talked about Northwestern and their linebacker tandem with Bryce Gallagher and Alexander Mueller. Michigan State's Jacoby Windman and Cal Halliday might be a better combination at linebacker. Cal Halliday, 120 tackles, 11 TFLs last season, led the team in both of those categories. Last season, second team all Big Ten. Led the Big Ten in tackles per game with 10 tackles per game. He's all over the football field. 2021 freshman All-American. He's one of the best linebackers in the Big Ten. He is. I don't maybe think he gets a ton of looks because Michigan State has kind of underperformed on the defensive side of the football, but he's definitely one of those guys. And Jacoby Windman, 49 tackles, 10.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks. He led the team in sacks, and he only played in 8 games last season. Tunnel Gate will do that to you. 6 forced fumbles as well last season. This is a guy that attacks. He was one of those defensive players early in the season that was putting up eye-popping numbers, that was getting into the backfield continuously. If he can stay on the field for all 12 games this season, this combination could be dynamite for Michigan State this season. You look to the defensive line, I like what Sparty is putting forth on the D-line as well. Let's start with Simeon Barrow. He anchors the defensive line at 6'3", 290 pounds at tackle, 40 tackles, 9 TFLs, and 4 sacks. Those are big numbers for an interior defensive lineman. How about Tamisha Adelier, the transfer from Texas A&M? He was one of the best defensive linemen from the class of 2021. 4-star, top 100 guy. Really good with his hands to be able to swim and rip past some of these linemen. So he's very good at getting into the backfield. Did not put up a ton of numbers at Texas A&M. Right? Fairly young, 6'4", 295, but he could be a big-time impact transfer if Mel Tucker and Michigan State can get the most out of his talent. You look at Derek Harmon as well, 6'5", 320 pounds, a big boy, freshman All-American, honorable mention last season, 30 tackles, 3 TFLs, 2 sacks, 5 starts for Harmon. Don't forget about Chris Bogle. He was a transfer that a lot of people had their eye on last season. Played in just 4 games. He was injured the final 8, but in those 4 games, 11 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and a sack. He has the potential to be really good off the edge if he can stay healthy. Don't forget about true freshman By Jobe. 4-star, 6'4", 230. Maybe he doesn't pack the most size on a defensive line, but he's got great athletic ability for an edge rusher. He's not going to crack the starting lineup. I don't know how much action he's really going to see, but he's one of those true freshmen that I think you could put him in certain situations, put him in a 3rd and 7, put him in a 3rd and 9, pin your ears back, rush the passer, kids, see if you can get to the old QB and drag him down for the old sack of potatoes. Like, that's where By Jobe, that's where I want to see him. I want to see him in those 3rd down possibly situations. Going to be fun to see if he sees the field this season. Now, over the past few years, secondary, defensive backs, it's been a weak point. They've given up a lot of yards via the pass. They've lost safety Xavier Henderson, which has kind of been the anchor of that secondary. So how do you replace it? I'm not going to come up and say that this is a good secondary. Is it an average secondary? Maybe. But once again, we're talking about improving. I believe this will be an improved secondary for Michigan State. First, you look at Charles Brantley, who, he entered the portal and then he came back out. That was at the same time that you saw Payton Thorne and Keon Coleman leave, but he ended up withdrawing his name from the transfer portal. That's big. He started 11 games last season, led the team in pass breakups with 48 tackles, 7th on the team. He's a good player over there at corner. Samar Melvin transfers in from Wisconsin at corner. Didn't receive a ton of playing time with the Badgers, but was still involved. 2 pass breakups last season. 4-star talent coming out of high school. I expect him to be heavily involved in what they're doing in the secondary. Big transfer here. I think this is going to be an underrated transfer when all is said and done. Terry Roberts, coming in from Iowa, originally committed to Miami, but then Michigan State got their hands on him. When you look at Iowa last season, he just found ways to make plays at certain points during the game. It seems like these TV broadcast teams were calling his name a good amount, and he always seemed to show up in these games despite a secondary that was loaded last year at Iowa. He found his way onto the field to make some plays. I expect him to be in a starting role for Michigan State and really excel and really put his name up a few pegs in Big Ten circles. He had 2 pass breakups and an interception last year at Iowa. We mentioned in this video, you got to see the development of some of these recruits that Mel Tucker has brought in. It's got to be at safety. We mentioned the loss of Xavier Henderson at safety. You look at Jaden Mangum and Dylan Tatum, 2 guys that are expected to be in there, maybe both start at safety, both highly rated 4-star guys coming out of the class of 2022. Now, Xavier Henderson was out for 5 games last season, so Michigan State has gotten a taste of a Xavier Henderless secondary. These guys, we got to see the development of some of these recruits, because if guys don't develop, this team, Mel Tucker, is going to continue to rely on the transfer portal. Let's see some of these development. Let's see it happen at safety with Jaden Mangum and Dylan Tatum. Look, I think this is a solid defense. This is a defense that I believe will improve at Michigan State this season. I believe this is a Michigan State team that can do some things on the defensive side of the ball. The keys for Michigan State are going to be running the football on offense, playing good defense, staying healthy the entire season. Now, in order for Michigan State to have a good schedule, you got to win some football games. In order to win some football games, you got to play them. Let's look at the schedule. Okay, this is a team that should start 2-0 across the season. It should build some momentum early in the game. But I look at that Maryland game as a possible swing game for Sparty, because that Washington game is going to be really tough. But if you're 3-1 going into the Iowa game, that could be a fairly competitive contest, okay? They could have a pretty decent record going into the Michigan game as well. Man, I look up and down this schedule. I've seen somewhere from 4 wins all the way up to 8 wins. I mentioned at the top, this is an interesting team. I think there's a lot of range for this Michigan State team in 2023. Sometimes I think they're going to be a 4 or 5 win teams. Other days I wake up and say, wow, Michigan State, well, if they get everything right, they could win 7 or 8 games this year and they could really turn things around. 2023 is an extremely pivotal year for the Michigan State Spartans. If Mel Tucker wants to continue to build this program forward and they want to try to get back to that level that they achieved in 2021, 2023 is key. Because if they take a step down again, another 5-win season, God forbid they go down to 4 wins, I don't know how much longer Mel Tucker, despite his contract, I don't know how much more years Mel Tucker may be the head coach at Michigan State. But Michigan State has assembled some solid pieces. Considering we thought the sky was falling a few months ago when Payton Thorne and Keon Coleman transferred out of the program, this could be a solid team and a team to watch out for in the Big Ten in 2023.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.